So the purpose of this video is just to summarise some of the things that we discussed about the poem Neutral Tones. The first thing we talked about was the significance of the title. So we talked about the fact that the word tones has two different possible meanings. So neutral tones could be about tones of colour. And if the tones of colour are neutral, then they're lacking vibrancy, they're lacking a real depth of colour, they're quite bland. But tones could also be to do with tones of voice, and in which case there's no emotion or vibrancy in the voice. And that sets us up to understand something about the relationship that's going to be described, that it seems to be a relationship which is going to be lacking in vibrancy and colour and energy. Then in stanza 1, the key things that we talked about, first of all, we talked about the word stood, the fact that it's inactive, that they're passive, they're not moving, nothing's going forward. So this idea that was in the title about a lack of energy is repeated in the word stood. Equally, the word pond suggests the same kind of thing. A pond is a body of water that is stagnant. It's not moving. It doesn't increase or decrease. It stays the same, and therefore it's about a relationship that's not moving on, or it could suggest a relationship that's not moving on. The fact that the poem is set in winter suggests coldness. It's a cold, bitter atmosphere. There's an absence of life and joy. And the sun was white. So somebody in the class mentioned that stars, when they die, sometimes go white. So therefore this might be part of the lexis of death, which we think is occurring throughout the poem as well. And this section here, chidden of God. Chidden of God means sort of absent of God. It's as though even God has given up on the relationship. God has abandoned. The whole relationship is abandoned, and God has abandoned them as well. And we also talked about the use or the repetition of the word and here and here. And the dullness, the pedestrian nature of using that word to link ideas. It's as if there's nothing really creative about what's going on in the relationship, and that's suggested through that repetition of those words. In fact, we've got a few leaves. It's not loads of leaves. There's nothing really. It's just the odd one or two, as if even the leaves can't be really be bothered to hang about, and they lay there. They're not flying around. Again, it's passive and lacking energy. The starving sod, the sibilance in there creates a harsh sound, and the starving sod, sod is a quite an old-fashioned word for soil, but it also suggests that the soil is starved of nutrients. It can't sustain anything. It can't give anything life or food. It can't keep things going. And again, that's the lexis of death repeated again, and it's again the idea that this relationship is not moving forwards. It's really damaged and struggling. The last line in the first stanza, they'd fallen from an ash. We talked about the fact that the word ash was a homophone. So we're talking about an ash tree there, but actually it also makes us think of ash, ashy remains from a fire, as if this relationship perhaps has been burnt out. And also the idea that whether it's leaves from an ash tree or it's sort of smoky remains, they're grey, sort of fairly colourless and bland. Again, the idea of something being bland and colourless. Now, in the second stanza, some of the things that we spent time talking about were words like rove. Your eyes on me were as eyes that rove. So roving is about moving, sort of roving as if you're feeling a little bit frustrated. Sometimes your eyes might rove if you're looking for something more interesting. So there's an energy on movement there, but it's not a positive movement. And the fact that there's enjambment at the end of that line, so the line continues into the next, suggests that looking for something else continues for a long time, as well as the riddle or the complexity of their relationship. Their relationship seems to be a puzzle that they're trying to work out. It doesn't make sense to them anymore. And it's not even a great riddle. It's not even a great puzzle. It's something that's boring and tedious and something which is just, a pain to have to try and work out. And that puzzle has been going on for a long time with no resolution. We also talked about the fact that some words, there's something very indistinct, sort of indefinite about the word some. The words themselves aren't identified, and it's as if, because they're playing between them to and fro, as if this is some kind of a sick game that they're playing, but it goes to and fro rather like a tennis match. Somebody hits the ball, somebody hits it back. There's no energy or freneticism or desperation. It's just something that they're doing almost to pass the time. There's no real purpose to what they do. It's a habit. And we spent quite a long time talking about this last line in this stanza, that on which lost the more by our love. And we talked about the fact that grammatically that's not a particularly perfect sentence, and therefore it seems like even their words don't make any sense anymore. So the lack of grammatical correctness in that sentence echoes the fact that nothing that they do makes sense, nothing works properly anymore in this relationship. Some of the things that we discussed in stanza 3 were about the usual relationship of mouths and eyes with romantic poetry. That often the mouth and the eyes are things that are focused on in romantic poetry. They're often red or shining or bright, that they symbolize love. But here, eyes and mouths are associated with negativity. So effectively, Hardy is subverting the tradition of using eyes and mouths in romantic poetry. We also talked about the line about an ominous bird a wing. So birds, because they easily move between earth and the sky, they've often seemed to be a link between the temporal and the spiritual world. So life on earth and life in the heavens. So they can be a relationship between those two things. But here, really, they're seen as a harbinger of something very negative. So you'd say a harbinger of doom. There's a bird a wing, and because it's a wing, it's flying, it's on its way. So there's a hint that something really bad is likely to happen, although it's not specified what that thing is. Perhaps the end of the relationship, but it could be something else. In the final stanza, we noticed that there was a lot of repetition of E sounds, so keen, deceives, me, tree, leaves. So that repetition of that E sound, it's a sharp and painful sound, almost like someone is crying out. And there are also alliterative aspirates, so breathy sounds that might make you think about sighing, and this rings with wrong. So you've got the alliterative aspirates with the W, the two W's or the three W's there, but also the play on the word rings. So although it's rings as in wringing your hands with distress, this is also making you hear the word ring as in the ring on your finger, like a wedding ring. And what's being pointed out here is that it's the wrong ring. So it's quite a complex thing to say. Rings with wrong is actually difficult to say. And that, just the very difficult nature of the phrase itself is probably also reminding us that there's something very difficult and wrong with this relationship. And we've also we come back to the pond at the end of this poem. So we're back at the pond. We were at the pond at the beginning. So you've got this circularity. The pond is probably circular, and you've got this circularity of structure as well, that actually we're back where we started. So nothing is moving forward. This relationship is stagnant. It's stuck. Nothing's going forward in a positive way. I forgot to mention it, but we also, as we were looking at stanza 2, we noticed quite a lot of the repetition of O sounds. So O in God, O in in sod, and the O in pond, and that O sound also seemed like a painful exclamation to us. We talked about that quite a lot. One last thing that we mentioned was the rhyme scheme, the ABBA, repetitive rhyme scheme. We said that that the structure of that seemed constrained and restrictive, that there was no sense of exuberance, and that restriction might have been echoed by the fact that the poem is written in quatrains all the way through, that there's no getting out of a very regular structure, just like there's no getting out of the regularity of the structure of this relationship. So the structure of the poem echoes what the people inside the relationship seem to be experiencing.